The construction of America's railroads was a very long and grueling task. Many immigrants came from both east and west to dig, build and run these lines, but the dangerous working conditions also led to many of them tragically dying to complete the work. In some cases, however, it wasn't always accidents or illness that led to the loss of life, but something a little more sinister. In 1832, a rail line was being constructed through Pennsylvania for the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad. Contractor Philip Duffy, who oversaw the project, hired a group of Irish immigrants to build the line. The project was completed by autumn of that same year. However, the initial group of Irish labourers who worked on the line reportedly died under mysterious circumstances. The route, known as Duffy's Cut, functioned as intended, but the railroad for some reason kept all documentation related to its construction and the deaths of the Irish workers under strict lock and key, with nobody really sure as to why. More mysteriously, for decades afterward, locals reported seeing strange lights and ominous floating orbs around the forest the line travelled through, with some going as far as to saying the place was haunted. Almost a century and a half later, in 1970, the Pennsylvania Railroad, who now owned the line, became bankrupt and began selling off assets. A secretary named Joseph Trippican decided to take the secret documents for himself, with nobody being sure whether he wanted to deliberately keep them a secret or if he just wanted them out of curiosity. His grandson, Reverend Dr. Frank Watson, found the documents in the 1990s and studied them alongside his brother Dr. William Watson and two members of the Immaculata University, after taking an interest in the deaths of the Irish workers at the railroad camp all those years ago. It turned out the initial group was made up of 57 Irish workers who were recorded as having died from an outbreak of cholera and were buried beside the railroad line. Naturally, this led to them investigating the site in 2004 and excavating around the area. To their surprise, they found several small pieces of human bone, teeth, and a few personal items such as old smoking pipes. The dig continued on and off until, in 2012, the bodies of 5 men and 1 woman were uncovered. It was decided the remains would be identified before being reburied in proper graves. However, closer examination of the remains revealed a very alarming revelation. Not only were some of the bodies found to have been buried in coffins, something very unusual to do if the person died of cholera, as cholera victims were usually burned to prevent the spreading of the disease, but it was found some of the bodies had received either blunt force trauma to the head or had been shot at around time of death, meaning some of these people had been killed by another person, not cholera. It was soon theorized that the Irish work camp had suffered an outbreak of cholera, but with it having a survival rate of between 40 to 60%, locals didn't want to risk the possibility of it spreading, and as such, the workers in the camp were killed to contain it. It's even documented that some of the workers may have tried to run, but were eventually hunted down. Now, if you think that sounds a little extreme, you would be right. But it's important to understand that many immigrants employed by railroads and other industries at the time were practically viewed as disposable. Of all these immigrants, however, African, European and Asian, Irish Catholics were treated the worst, being considered barely even human or even on par with runaway slaves as they'd left their home which was under the rule of the crown, essentially as dishonourable as a servant fleeing from their master. So when the camp started to suffer from cholera, nobody around understood Irish or cared about them enough to provide medical assistance. Then when several workers died, progress slowed and it was possible the disease could spread, neither the railroad nor any of the locals had any problem with just getting rid of the camp. For Duffy, it was easier to just dispose of the old workers and bring in a new group of immigrants that had just arrived from Ireland. The railroad naturally covered up this massacre, and as such, for all these years, nobody knew the terrible truth of what happened to the workers, with most assuming they were simply victims of the cholera pandemic. No wonder locals kept seeing strange things and claiming the area was haunted. The investigation is still going on to this day. However, Amtrak, who now operates the line, have forbidden any further digging around the area. All recovered remains were identified and given an appropriate burial, with one body, identified as Catherine Burns, being returned to Ireland for burial in 2015. In summary, Duffy's cut serves as a bleak reminder that not all railroad history is romantic or as pleasant as we wished it was. As bleak as it is, it's important we remember these moments in history, not only to remember those who helped build the world we live in, but also how far we've come in understanding, accepting, and respecting others, and perhaps how much further we still have to go. Subscribe for more.